Yo, hold on. Before you click off this video thinking this is just another recycled Epstein headline, it's not. Because what's happening right now isn't about who is in the files, it's about who isn't. And that's what has Joe Rogan and Katt Williams both reacting in a way that's making people pause. Not accusing anyone, not naming random celebrities as guilty. Let's make that very clear from the jump. This is about the reaction, the tone, the feeling that something about the rollout of these documents just doesn't sit right. And when two guys like Rogan and Katt, who've been around powerful circles for decades, both start hinting that the public might not be seeing the full picture, that's when the internet starts connecting dots. So let's slow this down and actually unpack it properly. When the latest Epstein-related documents were unsealed, everyone expected chaos. Twitter was refreshing every 5 seconds. TikTok was already pre-writing breaking captions. YouTube thumbnails were halfway done before people even read the PDFs. People were expecting bombshells. They were expecting shocking new celebrity reveals. They were expecting names that social media has been speculating about for years to finally show up in black and white. And then they didn't. Now, yes, some high-profile figures were mentioned, but a lot of the names that constantly trend whenever Epstein trends, nowhere to be found in those specific releases. And that gap, that space between expectation and reality, is what sparked this entire reaction. Joe Rogan has always had this mindset where he questions institutions, not in a dramatic conspiracy way, but in a why does this feel incomplete way. And when these documents came out, you could sense that energy shift. It wasn't outrage, it wasn't shock, it was more like skepticism. The kind of skepticism that comes from someone who understands how powerful networks operate. He's talked for years about how elite circles are small, how billionaires, politicians, entertainers, and media executives often overlap in private spaces most people never see. So when the Epstein story resurfaced again, and certain rumored names didn't appear in the official filings, the reaction wasn't they're innocent or they're guilty. It was more like, is this everything? Because Epstein wasn't some random guy. He wasn't isolated. He moved in elite rooms for decades. Private jets, private islands, private meetings. So naturally, when documents surface that don't match the scale people imagined, it feels off. When documents were released, some high-profile figures had already been publicly reported in connection with Epstein over the years. Former President Bill Clinton had appeared in flight logs that were widely covered by major media outlets. Prince Andrew faced civil allegations that were publicly litigated. Bill Gates has publicly acknowledged meeting Epstein in the past, something he later described as a mistake. Now, it's important to be clear. Being mentioned in flight logs, meeting someone, or appearing in testimony does not automatically imply wrongdoing. But here's where the online reaction really took off. Social media had speculated about a much wider circle of entertainers and powerful figures for years. So when certain celebrity names people expected to see didn't appear in those specific document releases, that's when the something isn't right conversation really started. Now let's bring Katt Williams into this. Katt's been calling out Hollywood culture for years. He's openly spoken about power dynamics in entertainment, about how careers can be made or destroyed quietly, about how certain people are protected. Again, those are his opinions shaped by his experiences. But when someone like that sees a global scandal involving powerful elites, and then watches how selective the public fallout appears, he's not going to stay quiet about the energy of it. He's not naming new suspects. He's not presenting secret files. He's reacting to what feels like an incomplete narrative. And that's important, because what they're both tapping into isn't evidence, it's trust, or the lack of it. The Epstein case already shook public confidence massively. A wealthy financier connected to royalty, presidents, billionaires, academics, and yet he managed to operate for years. So when new documents are released and they don't completely unravel every powerful connection people imagined, the response becomes emotional. People expected a cinematic collapse of elite society. Instead, they got legal documents, dry transcripts, deposition excerpts, redacted sections, and nuance. Lots of nuance. And nuance doesn't trend. Now here's something most people skip over. Being named in a legal document does not automatically imply wrongdoing, and not being named does not automatically imply innocence or protection. It simply means that specific set of documents did or did not include that person in the context of that lawsuit or testimony. But social media doesn't operate on legal precision. It operates on momentum. So when Rogan hints that the story feels unfinished and Katt suggests powerful figures rarely face real exposure, it feeds into a broader cultural mood. And that mood is this. People don't fully trust that everything has been revealed, not because they have proof something is hidden, but because the scale of Epstein's connections feels bigger than the legal consequences that followed. That emotional mismatch is powerful. Let's talk about expectations. For years, online culture built this idea that once the Epstein list dropped, it would change everything. People treated it like some mythical document that would instantly expose half of Hollywood. But that's not how legal systems work. There isn't one master celebrity list. There are case files, witness statements, flight logs, civil suit records, fragments. And when those fragments don't match the dramatic buildup social media created, people interpret that as something being wrong. But sometimes it's just overhype colliding with legal reality. That doesn't mean there aren't unanswered questions. There absolutely are. Epstein's network was real. His influence was real. The scope of his connections was wide. But speculation filled in blanks that official documents may never confirm. And Rogan and Katt are reacting to that tension. They're essentially voicing what a lot of people are thinking. How could someone so embedded in elite society operate for so long without more visible consequences for others? That's the underlying frustration, not specific accusations, systemic skepticism. And that's a big difference. Because when you zoom out, this isn't really about individual celebrities. It's about perception of power. It's about whether powerful circles protect themselves. It's about whether justice feels equal. And when those questions linger, every document release becomes a test. Did this change everything? Or did it just maintain the status quo? When people say something isn't right, they're not necessarily pointing to a secret vault of hidden names. They're reacting to a feeling that the fallout hasn't matched the scale of the scandal. And that feeling keeps resurfacing. Every time new files drop, every time a trending clip goes viral, every time someone like Rogan or Katt expresses doubt. Now here's the grounded truth. There are ongoing investigations tied to broader networks. There are sealed proceedings that may never become public. There are privacy laws that limit what gets released. And there are also cases where rumors online simply don't align with verified evidence. All of that can exist at the same time. But that complexity doesn't satisfy curiosity. Curiosity wants clean answers. It wants clear villains. It wants a dramatic unraveling. Real life rarely delivers that. So what we're watching isn't an exposure of hidden celebrities. We're watching a cultural moment where expectation collided with documentation, and the documentation didn't fully satisfy the expectation. That gap created the phrase, "something isn't right." Whether that means incomplete transparency, systemic power protection, or just overblown internet hype, that's still up for debate. And here's where this gets even more layered. Because when people hear Epstein files, they imagine one giant master list. Like there's some secret spreadsheet somewhere with every powerful person ever connected to him, just waiting to be revealed. But that's not how this works. What's been released over time are chunks of civil court documents, depositions, testimony, old lawsuits, references pulled from very specific legal disputes. A name appearing in one of those documents could mean anything from flew on a plane once, to was mentioned in passing by a witness, to was accused of something. The context matters. And that's where a lot of the online reaction gets blurry. Because when certain big celebrities don't show up in these particular releases, some people take that as suspicious. Others take it as proof that internet rumors were exaggerated. And then you've got voices like Rogan and Katt stepping back and basically saying, why does this still feel incomplete? Not incomplete in a, there's definitely a secret list being hidden way. Incomplete in a, this story was massive, global, connected to elite institutions, and yet it feels like the ripple effect was smaller than expected way. That's the distinction. If you really listen to Rogan's tone when he talks about powerful networks in general, not even just this case, he tends to focus on how tight those circles are. How billionaires, media executives, politicians, and celebrities all run in overlapping spaces, private events, invite-only conferences, fundraisers, think tanks. So when someone like Epstein was operating in those circles for years, the natural assumption is that the network must have been extensive. And when the public-facing consequences don't seem to match the imagined scale of that network, people feel a disconnect. That disconnect becomes something isn't right. Now flip over to Katt's perspective. Katt doesn't come at it like a legal analyst. He comes at it like someone who's been in Hollywood, who's seen careers rise and fall, who's openly talked about how the industry can protect certain figures while isolating others. When he reacts to stories like this, it's less about the paperwork and more about the culture of silence, the culture of influence, the culture of who you know. So when high-profile rumors don't translate into official mentions in specific document drops, his reaction isn't shock. It's more like, that's how power works. Again, that's his worldview, his interpretation of the industry, not evidence. But when two very different personalities, Rogan from the long-form free speech podcast world and Katt from the sharp insider comedian perspective, both land on the same emotional note of skepticism, that's what amplifies it. And the audience picks up on that emotional frequency. Because let's be honest, the Epstein case was never never just about one man. It was about access. Access to wealth, access to influence, access to institutions that most people will never even get near. So when the legal fallout appears contained, controlled, limited to certain names and not others, it triggers a deeper fear people already have, that powerful systems are insulated. That fear doesn't require proof to exist. It just needs ambiguity. And this case has had ambiguity from day one. Epstein's initial plea deal years ago already created controversy. His connections to elite figures were photographed, documented socially, widely discussed. Then his death added another layer of unanswered questions. So by the time these document releases started happening in waves, the public expectation was sky high. People weren't just expecting names, they were expecting clarity. And clarity is the one thing this story hasn't fully delivered. And that's really the takeaway. This isn't about throwing accusations around. It's about why the scale of the Epstein scandal still feels bigger than the answers people have seen so far. Rogan and Katt aren't presenting secret evidence. They're reacting to that same unsettled feeling a lot of people have. Maybe it's just internet hype clashing with legal reality. Maybe it's something deeper about trust and transparency. Let me know what you think in the comments, respectfully. Anyway, this concludes today's video. Be sure to subscribe to LoafTube for future celebrity videos, and turn on that post notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Until then, see you in the next one.